All right then, so we are here to talk a little bit about one of the readings for this course, this new section on the American city, and in particular we're going to focus on the American Parade as an example of how a community comes together to express cultural identity, civic identity, but also in a way that at least one author suggests is uniquely American. So, here we go. Let's take a look at Mary Ryan's presentation on the American Parade. Again, you have an essay on this in your packet. You should be reading it, in your content folder at Blackboard. You should be taking a look at it. And she uses a different approach from most of the other authors we've been looking at. She's going to take an event that doesn't necessarily have a script, that doesn't necessarily have a written primary source aspect to it, and she's going to look at that as a historical document. So let's take a look. I have purposefully put together a PowerPoint on the first 20 or so pages of that essay that she has. The last third, the last 8-10 pages, those are for you to explore on your own, and perhaps in a discussion board if I can get that put together. And it's in that area that I'm hoping, should you choose to write on this topic for one of your papers, that you'll put your own spin on the information that Mary Ryan is proposing in her essay. So, let's get going. So, the American Parade. The title of her piece is The American Parade, Representations of the 19th Century Social Order. She's going to focus on San Francisco, New York, and New Orleans. All great port cities, all vibrant cities in the 19th century, all cities engaged in remarkable growth, and I think we're pretty safe in suggesting that all three of those cities have a unique identity. This is an image from San Francisco. I hope you can see it where you are. If not, again, I'll be putting this up on Blackboard, and so you can take a look there as well. But this is a black and white image from 1850 of San Francisco. I hope you can see here the bay, way in the background, and ships anchored out there in the bay. And this venue, this vantage point, if you will, from which the person is taking the photo, it's an early photograph, is up on a hill looking down on the city. So Mary Ryan looking at the American Parade, and here she is with a nice definition. The American Parade, a distinctive and curious mode of public celebration in which a sizable portion of the urban population organized into platoons, companies, regiments, ranks and columns. They organized and then paraded through the public thoroughfares. She also considers the American Parade the characteristic genre of 19th century civic ceremony. So let's take a moment here and think about this definition that she's got going here, right? It is this idea of a militaristic, right, definition here. We've got things like platoons, ranks and columns, companies, regiments. The parade originally, in any definition you'll find in a dictionary, will talk about parading is something that military groups who are trying to demonstrate their readiness, trying to demonstrate that they have completed their training, will go through and have a parade. You'll often find at most military academies parade grounds. Right? So a parade, she's using military nomenclature for this, and that makes pretty good sense. Because when you think of a parade, it's people marching in a row, down a street, in line, in particular segments and organizations. She also suggests that when it comes to trying to figure out what cities are about, that the parade is a pretty good thing to take a look at. So, how about parades as historical documents? She says, parades are stories that people tell about themselves. The parade offers a well-rounded documentation of past culture. And then accounts of parades, she says, record the actions as well as the words of the past. So parades are stories people tell about themselves. She gets this from an anthropologist who has also taken a look at parades in the modern setting. What do parades tell us about people? So parades are stories that people tell about themselves. I like that. That kind of makes sense to me. Parades offer a well-rounded documentation of past culture, because we're oftentimes doing parades for historical purposes, right? Yeah? But if we take a look at a parade in the past, perhaps it will also tell us a little bit about the culture that it once represented, that was contemporary at the time. Accounts of parades record the actions as well as the words of the past. Yeah, most of her accounts of parades are from newspapers. Newspaper reporters who showed up for the parade wanted to record it, and so most of her examples come from that. So the way that the newspapers tell the story, the way that the newspapers describe the parades are also of interest to her. This image, I don't know if you can see it well from your vantage point, but this image is a painting of New York. And I don't know if you can tell, but here you've got the island of Manhattan, waterways all around. And this is New York from 1873. New York in 1873, and you can see, I hope, if not on this version, then perhaps if you take a look at this image on the PowerPoint separately from this recording, that you'll get a really good indication of the streets, the thoroughfares, the complexity that is clearly going on here in New York in the 19th century. So parades as historical documents, we're going to continue with that discussion. Ryan suggests that we can derive insights from parades, that insights derived from parades offer a high level of generality. A high level of generality. So you can make some general understanding, some general points about parades, is what she's saying. Primarily because there were a large number of participants in these parades, but then the audience for the parades was also quite large. So who knows what any individual along the parade route, marching in the parade, might have thought particularly, but this whole idea that there are thousands of people in the parade, thousands of people watching the parade, indicates that people are there for a purpose, people are there enjoying themselves in one way or another, right? And so what are we doing together? So just some general ideas. You won't know what each individual is talking about or thinking about, but maybe some general ideas. Parades reflect public consensus, she says. Parades reflect public consensus. The idea that people get together and agree that we're going to have a parade, but also the idea that if you're going to represent yourself in a parade in some particular fashion, the message that you're sending, everybody needs to get, right? So creating some kind of public consensus, whether it's in the preparation for the event or the actual event itself, creating some kind of meaning, sending some kind of message. So parades reflect a public consensus. Everybody knows what a parade is for. Everybody knows what the parade is supposed to be, what kind of message it's sending to us, right? Let's see, parades offer a public picture that American cities presented of themselves. That's interesting. The idea that we as a community putting on a parade have a particular image that we want to present. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, this is an image from San Francisco, 1850. This is a painting. And this image in particular, yeah, is, I don't know if you can make it out, but you've got the bay up here. There are ships anchored there, and then you've got the city here. It does look like not much different from Cowtown in Wichita, right? The streets are dirt. This was really an overnight sensation. San Francisco grew up almost literally overnight for the California Gold Rush, right? So there you go. So now she's going to tell you how parades in these cities worked. And she's seeing some common themes and some common aspects to parades in New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans. First off, she says parades are organized into separate marching units. Right? There are different groups of people who identify themselves as part of the parade, but they're identifying themselves together. I know this probably makes really good sense to you, but in the U.S., in the 19th century, this is the first time anybody ever did this. So it is creating what a parade is in the American sense. The parades enrolled a large portion of the city's population. There were some restrictions on who could march, but very, very few. And this really gets Ryan jazzed because she thinks that she can see a whole cross-section of any given city in a parade in the 19th century. The other thing she notes, and this is interesting to see, is she says the American parade is aimless. It really has no plot. That basically we all get together for the sake of marching, we march, and we all get together for the sake of marching and to display ordinary citizens on parade, and then we're done, right? So it's a very interesting kind of phenomenon, right? So just to recap, parades are organized into separate marching units. Parades enrolled a large portion of the city's population with very few restrictions. They seem to be aimless. They seem to have no plot, like a play might have, right? And parades seem to be a march for the sake of marching. A march for the sake of marching, as well as for the display of the ordinary citizens who marched. Again, this is from page 134 of her essay. So back to the invention of the American parade. She says that this parade that she's describing comes along between 1825 and 1850. 1825 to 1850. And she says there's some important things to think about in regards to the city in that time period, particularly the American city, these cities of San Francisco, New York, New Orleans, that are important to note. And she believes all combine somehow to create the proper setting for the parade to be created. So first off, New York's population during the same period grew sevenfold. It grew to 1.2 million between 1825 and 1850. That's amazing. So tremendous growth in the city in population. San Francisco became almost, as we said earlier, an instant city with 50,000 people coming into this region for the California gold rush of 1849. And San Francisco almost literally created overnight. Amazing. The other thing to note in New Orleans, right, I almost skipped that over. In New Orleans, the population also tripled during this time. So great population growth in the U.S., great population growth in these major port cities in the 19th century. So big population growth. Population growth included an influx of immigrants at this time. If you know your American history and you know this concept of immigration in this country and that we're this great melting pot of different peoples, this is the time it's happening. So we're getting immigrants from Asia, immigrants from Europe, and it's immigrants from the Caribbean, all over. So we're getting people from all over the world coming to the United States, into these great port cities, trying to experience that American dream, who come together and do indeed create that melting pot that you've heard a lot about in your history of U.S. classes. Oh, this is an image of New Orleans. I'm not sure how well you can catch this one, but this is an image of New Orleans in the 19th century of Mardi Gras. And again, probably you might be able to blow it up a little bit, but you've got large crowds of people here watching the parade. I don't know if you can tell that these are people. Here's the parade itself. And then even up here, I don't know if you can catch it, but there's a balcony up here and there are people up here on the balcony. So parade watchers up high, parade watchers on the street, parade participants going through the streets. Again, this is Mardi Gras in New Orleans. I myself haven't been to Mardi Gras in New Orleans. If you've had a chance, you know that it can be pretty spectacular and creates great identity for that city. So we talked about great population growth in the 19th century and how population growth really sets the scene for the creation of the parade. The other element that Ryan brings in is this whole idea of industrialization, that it's during the 19th century that America dives into the Industrial Revolution. You may remember from your history classes in Europe or even your American history classes this idea that the Industrial Revolution is going from a period of craftsmanship where individual craftsmen made products, right, individually, to something like the assembly line. It is Henry Ford who creates the assembly line in this country in the late 19th century. But the Industrial Revolution, the idea of doing large-scale manufacture, comes to the United States in the 19th century big time. Now, the Civil War is going to slow us down just a little bit as the rest of the world industrializes, particularly Europe, Australia, but Canada even. But for us, the 19th century is when it's really kicking in. So with industrialization, our cities are going to change as well. You're going to get an influx of merchants, capitalists, as Ryan puts it, capitalists and shopkeepers, artisan, craftspeople, industrial workers, and even day laborers who will come into the city just to work, and then maybe they'll go back out to the countryside when they're done. So great influx of population, big industrialization, all of these things serve to make huge changes to the American city and push the American city further and further beyond what it once was. So other things to consider with regard to the development of the American Parade. Ryan also talks about big social changes that are going on in American cities because of population growth, because of industrialization. Some of the things that she'll note in New York in particular, we're going to see lots of riots in New York. Various reasons. It could be anti-draft riots. It could be, as we get into the Civil War, it could be what she's going to call nativist demonstrations, where there is a reaction from the folks who live in New York to all this immigration and how it's creating great change. If you saw the Daniel Day-Lewis film, Streets of New York, that's one of the inspirations for that Scorsese film, is the influx of immigrants and the reaction of the locals to it. So riots involving, pretty much associated with social change, changes that are going on. In San Francisco, we have examples of vigilantism, where the city has grown so fast and it's a dangerous town, and local law enforcement, local government can't keep up. And so we start to see people taking the law into their own hands in order to create order. Well, sometimes local law enforcement doesn't want local vigilantes to take over, and so we're going to see some rioting in that regard, so some unrest, some chaos. As we move closer to the Civil War, New Orleans is going to be occupied by the military, because as we move into the Civil War, the North doesn't want that major port to fall to the South. So lots of turmoil for the people in New Orleans as well in this first part of the 19th century. So this desire for order, Ryan suggests, order as a response to great population growth, order as a response to industrialization, order as a response to some of the social chaos, some of the even violent unrest in these cities. She suggests this desire for order in this, quote, diverse, turbulent, contentious populations might, it's a big might lead to the invention of some unifying public rituals. So that's where she's headed. She believes that for the sake of order, for the sake of creating these cities, giving them something new, as we move into the 19th century, confronted with the new reality of who they are, overflowing populations, great ethnic diversity, great diversity as to professions, right? Industrialism, all kinds of things coming together, that you throw all that together and people are going to want some order. Let's see, so why a parade? Why is a parade going to be an example of civic pageantry, of civic identity? Well, she suggests this has a lot to do with urban planning, or the lack thereof. This has a lot to do with the topography of what a city is. We're going to have more reading in the modern city coming at you before the semester's over that talks specifically about this. How do we plan a city? Well, by the time the parade comes forward, nobody's really thought of how do we have good public space. We have some good public space in cities, to be sure, but the population's gotten so large that you can't possibly come up with a public space in New York or San Francisco that's going to hold everybody. So one of the issues that Ryan suggests is that the dense densely built, or the densely built environment of a city, say in New York, San Francisco, New Orleans, provided very few open spaces large enough for the entire population to enact their communal dramas, to enact their communal festivals, however you want to view that term. So, Ryan says, let's use the streets. The streets are long. The streets wind throughout the entirety of the city. Why not use that city street for public space to have a celebration? So the parade, she says, was much like the social world in which it germinated. Mobile, voluntaristic, laissez-faire, live and let live, if you will, and open. The parade offered admission to almost any group with sufficient energy, determination, organizational ability, and internal coherence to board it. It's a great phrase. So basically, she's saying that the parades themselves were made up of the people who wanted to have them. The city itself provided the venue, the inspiration. We want some order. We want to create some identity. But also, the landscape of the city was such that the really only way to celebrate being a New Yorker, being a San Franciscan, being New Orleans, was to take to the streets and take an aimless walk. So the other thing she's going to bring up in her essay is that the parade is a democratic thing. It's a democratic experience. It combines the efforts of the public and governing officials. Right? Most civic ceremonies in most of the cities we've looked at are somehow funded by city government. That's what we're looking at in this class. And most are organized by elected officials. In parades, private citizens often initiated the proposals for such celebrations. Right? Once the proposal got to the proper city official, an open meeting would happen. And everyone, almost everyone, would have the opportunity then to take part in the planning of the parade, take part in the scope, the date, the timing of the parade, and they could have their own marching unit. They could have their own space in that parade, right? So the parade is a democratic thing. And so Ryan also likes that it's an expression of the democratic experience. So it combines the efforts of public people and government. It is funded typically. If there's funding to be done, there's a lot of funding provided by the city, sometimes by private individuals. Private citizens often initiate these parades, and there'll then be community meetings to talk about the parade, community meetings to talk about how we're going to proceed, and the people in general get involved. Now, there are exceptions as to who can be involved, and Ryan is going to talk to you about that. We're not going to see any people of color. We're not going to see African Americans in the parades. We're not going to see them in the planning. It's the early 19th century. Slavery is still a big deal. Even though we're in the North in New York and out in San Francisco, maybe it's not that big an issue, and in New Orleans, certainly around, we're going to find that African Americans, whether they're free or slave, are just not included in any aspect of this. Women typically not on board as well. So one of the things that she'll be talking about in this essay are social, ethnic, and class issues that do indeed bring about some change for some of these groups that originally are not involved, but over time do get access to the parade. Let's see, so this one quote I thought was really nice on page 139. The parade constitutes the public ceremonial language whereby 19th century Americans made order out of an urban universe that teemed with diversity and change. By choosing to join the march in specific contingents, paraders acted out a social vocabulary, impressing their group identities on the minds of countless bystanders. That's a great statement. That's one of the reasons I had to quote the whole thing. So it's a public, it has ceremonial language, if you will, symbolism, where 19th century Americans living in cities can make order out of an urban universe that's chaotic, diverse, changing very rapidly, by choosing to march in specific groups, right? They're acting out sort of who they are, impressing their group identity, we're saying, on the minds of countless bystanders. If you can imagine, as you walk by in your group, people are along the parade route, see you. They see the uniform you're wearing. If you're wearing a uniform, typically banners, particular kinds of hats. If you're flying flags, if you're flying some kind of banner that says who you are and what your message is, this is how you get it out. This is before YouTube. This is before any kind of social media. The parade is it. So a very cool approach, if you will, to trying to get into American history. This image is from the first parade that Mary Ryan looks at. She looks at the opening of the Erie Canal. And the people of New York got together and had a parade to celebrate the opening of the Erie Canal. They actually paraded on water and on land. This image, and I'm not sure how close you can get to it, but this image has a fire truck parading in the parade. And so you've got horses drawing this fire truck right here. So horses here. Here's the fireman, and here's a fire truck, and it's actually on a float. So the horse is drawing a float, and the fire truck gets up higher. That way people can see it, right? The reason we have these floats is so that people can see what's being on display. It's like you're putting your fire truck on a pedestal and then rolling it down the street, right? So there you go. So a very interesting image, an original image. And again, if you want to look closer at it, I'll put this online so that you can see the images a little better. So Mary Ryan has defined the parade for you. She's defined it as aimless march with no plot, right? She's defined it as an expression of civic identity and an expression perhaps of order, trying to establish some kind of order within a city that has grown in population, grown in immigration, grown in industrialization, and changed its nature almost overnight in a lot of these cities. Again, we said New York, the population of New York in the first half of the 19th century increased by sevenfold. So extraordinary changes. So now that she has got your definition of a parade, right, telling you how it grew out of the 19th century city, telling you what it seemed to be for, she says when the parade changes in the 19th century, that's a reflection of changes in the city or changes in society. So she'll get you a definition and she'll give you some great examples of parades. And then she's going to tell you that this kind of parading changed. We have it at one point, and then by the end of the 19th century, we're not doing it anymore. We're not doing the same kind of parade. And she says it has to do with changes in class within a particular city, changes with regard to ethnicity within a city, and then changes with regard to how we see women participating in society. So it's a very bold thing that she's trying to do here to see whether or not you can take an event like a parade, and be able to tell what's going on historically in a city by just looking at that one expression, that one event associated with public space, entertainment, the arts, recreation. Yeah? So for example, she'll say that early on in that parade from 1825, the opening of the Erie Canal, right? She'll say that early on, city leaders, even the faculty, the staff, the students of Columbia University marched in parades. They had their own space in every parade, right? And particularly, she says, you look at the parade and celebrating the Erie Canal, and you'll see these folks. She also says in those parades you can see someone's social class or how well they might have been respected in society by where they marched in the parade. So that too was an issue she thought very interesting from the early kind of parading that's going on in these cities. Early on, workers marched in a parade, and they might have marched in a parade with their company, with their bosses. They would have company flags, banners, indicating which company they worked for. So you'd have whole groups who were associated with one particular profession marching together, yet they marched not as all machinists marching together, not as all teachers marching together, but you march with your particular employer. Right? Eventually, over time, that will give way to unions marching together. So professions or professionals are going to give way to labor. That's one of the things that Ryan thinks is very interesting. So we did have at one point university professors, corporation heads marching in these parades and marching sort of in the group. So the Columbia professors marched together. The steel company people marched together, management all the way down to the basic workers, right? But over time, that's going to change, and management is going to leave the parade, the professors are going to leave the parade, and typically what's going to start to happen is you're going to see unions or just basic labor groups marching together. So professionals will give way to labor. So that's one of the things she's looking at. She's trying to figure out why that happens. Why do some of the more elite members of our society decide not to parade anymore? What's up with that? So that's one of the changes she'll look at. And that's where you come in, because that's getting us into the second part of this essay, the part that I've left for you. So it's your turn, I say. Read this essay all the way through. I've given you the background or the layout of what she's trying to do, what Ryan's trying to do in this essay. It's now up to you to read the whole thing and get to the end. The last 10 pages or so discuss the changes in the parades of these three major U.S. cities. Your quiz and your essay assignment related to this argument is to think about how the parade changed over the course of the 19th century, and then how that change reflects social and economic changes in the city. Right, so let me read that again and get out of your way so you can see it all. So you're supposed to read the essay, Mary Ryan's essay on the American Parade, read it all the way through. The last 10 pages or so discuss changes in the parades as a reflection of changes in these three major cities: New York, New Orleans, San Francisco. Your quiz and your essay assignment, should you choose to write this essay, you have to write 3 in the course of the class, right? If you choose to write this essay, all of your quiz and that assignment relate to how the parade changed over the course of the 19th century and how that change reflects social and economic changes in the city. Yeah? So, if you haven't already read this, get reading. The final thing to talk about is, for me at least, is how do we make connections to this parade essay and the other things that we've been reading in class. How do we make connections? Because that's the idea. We don't let anything stand alone in a vacuum. It's certainly important to look at the growth of urbanization in the U.S., to look at the development of these great cities, especially these cities of New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans, these great port cities, to take a look at them. They're all unique. They all have their own identity. It's a great chance to look at it, but how does this connect to the other things we've been looking at in class? So, for example, we have looked at processions in Greek festivals. We've looked at that, and some of you have talked about festivals in your own hometown and talked about how that might be some interesting connections to what you know already. So are these parades different from those festivals, or are they really just an extension of them? We talked about Elizabeth I and her coronation parade. There was great planning that went behind that. We actually had the blueprints for that parade, right? So it's not just the Greeks, it's not just New York, it's also England. The people helping to create the spectacle and participating in it. Ryan says you've got to have participation to make a parade what it is, both the people marching along and the people on the sidelines cheering them on. So just as in the Greek theater, the Roman Colosseum, and the groundlings at the Globe in London, the people who are the spectators help to create the experience. There are certain social taboos about women participating in a lot of these events. There is also a certain social order to where you process in the parade, much like where you might sit in Athens, in Rome, or in London in order to view a spectacle there. Finally, like all of the other things we've looked at, we're always searching for a way that these kinds of events help to create identity. That's what Ryan's all about in this particular topic. So, thanks for your attention. We're moving on to the American Parade. I hope you're finding it interesting. See you in the next video.